This passage is on the current energy crisis and how to fix it. Let's have a quick summary of the passage and then answer questions. This year's energy shock is the most serious since the Middle Eastern oil crisis of 1973 and 79. It promises to inflict short-term pain and in the longer term transform the energy industry. The present energy crisis will inflict short-term pain. Right now we are all being inconvenienced, but eventually it is going to transform the energy industry. If governments respond ineptly means inefficiently, not properly, awkwardly, inefficiently. Inept is the opposite of adept. Adept means skilled, inept means to bungle it. If they respond ineptly, they could trigger a relapse towards fossil fuels, which would make it harder to stabilize the climate. So if governments take the wrong step now, handle this crisis, don't handle this crisis properly, we may have to revert, a relapse. There may be a relapse to the use of fossil fuels and make it harder to stabilize the climate. Instead, they must follow a perilous path, perilous, dangerous. So that is not the way to do it. They must follow a slightly tricky path that combines the security of energy supply with climate security. We need energy. We need a secure energy supply. At the same time, we also cannot damage our climate further. So we need governments, nations should follow the tricky path of combining a steady, stable energy, secure energy supply with climate security. Everywhere. This is the first paragraph having a lot of important points which gives us a clue to the rest of the passage. This is what he's going to talk about. Everywhere there are shortages and fragility. Energy shocks can become political catastrophes. A third of the rich world's inflation is of 8% is explained by soaring fuel and power costs. So everywhere you see there are problems. Energy shocks can lead to political catastrophe, political disasters. The rich world is going through inflation, and a third of that is due to soaring energy fuel prices and power cuts. Households struggling to pay bills are angry. Now, this is as far as nations as a whole are concerned. At the level of people, households are struggling to pay bills. And so they are angry. So the anger of the common man is leading to policies aimed at insulating them, protecting them, and boosting fossil fuel production, however dirty. So this is what nations are doing. Energy costs are going up. Fuel costs are going up. People, the common man is being affected. He is angry. Why should I pay more? I'm struggling to make ends meet. So this makes the leaders, the governments are trying to protect them, insulate them. And so what is their only way? They are going to have to boost fossil fuel production, however dirty, however dangerous, damaging and dirty for the climate it may be. Mr. Biden, who came to power promising a green revolution, plans to suspend petrol taxes and visit Saudi Arabia to ask it to pump more oil. This is what America is going to do. One, it's going to cut down petrol taxes so that the common man petrol can be a little more affordable for him. And he wants to ask Saudi Arabia to send some more oil to the US. Europe has emergency windfall levies, taxes, subsidies, price caps and more. Europe is trying its own method to tide over this energy crisis. You have taxes and subsidies, price caps and more. In Germany, coal-fired power plants are being taken out of mothballs. When you store things, put things away in storage, you put mothballs so that your clothes are not damaged. Now, Germany's power plants were shut down. Now, Germany is removing them from that shutdown phase and is planning to use them. It's planning in Germany, coal-fired power plants are being taken out of mothballs. They're trying to start them off again. Chinese and Indian state-run mining firms that the climate conscious hoped were on a fast track to extinction are digging up record amounts of coal. China and India, we all need energy. So different countries are trying to find ways to get more fuel, more energy. US is asking Saudi Arabia for more oil. It's asked. Germany has its own. It's trying to revive its coal-fired power plants, and India and China have gone back to coal mining, which people hoped would be stopped. Okay, this improvised chaos is potentially dangerous. All this the author calls improvised chaos. The kind of short-term plans that countries are making. He says this improvised chaos is potentially dangerous because it could stall the clean energy transition. Where is clean energy? All these countries are having to fall back on coal, fossil fuels, all the wrong things which are not good for the climate. So the clean energy transition which we were hoping for is being adversely affected. Public handouts and tax breaks for fossil fuels will be hard to withdraw. Once you start giving people fossil fuel handouts, means at a cheap or rate, handout is actually free. So when you start giving public fossil fuels and tax breaks for fossil fuels, subsidies on fossil fuels, you'll find it difficult to take it back again. So author obviously is saying, don't start that off. This is going to be dangerous for the clean energy transition. Dirty new power plants and oil and gas fields with 30 to 40 year lifespans would give their owners all right. Now in this paragraph, the author is coming up with his suggestions. What is that? Dirty new power plants and oil and gas fields with 30 to 40 year lifespan would give their owners more reason to resist phasing fossil fuel. Okay. It's continuing on the same thing, that when you have new power plants, so when we are reviving power plants, oil and gas fields, so author is saying new power plants, new gas fields with 30 to 40 year old lifespans would give their owners, people who own these gas fields, oil and gas fields, would not support phasing out fossil fuels. They are getting money, man. They are owners of fossil fields or oil fields and natural gas fields. New power plants have been set up. The owners of these power plants, these oil and natural gas fields, why would they want phasing out of fossil fuels? They won't, because they stand to profit from it. So this is what the author is saying. That is why, now he comes up with the suggestion. That is why governments must focus on tackling the fundamental problems confronting the energy industry. So instead of coming with all these short-term policies, governments must focus on tackling the fundamental problem. Go to the root of the problem, which is the energy industry is facing. Go there. Go to the fundamental problem of the energy industry. One priority is to find a way to ramp up fossil fuel projects. The author is not saying don't have fossil fuel projects. He says yes, ramp up fossil fuel projects, especially relatively clean natural gas that have an artificially truncated lifespan of 15 to 20 years. Instead of 30 to 40 year, the normal lifespan of a oil and natural gas field is 30 to 40 years, we can infer. He says instead of that, you should prioritize on clean, relatively clean natural gas. Second, you should focus on those projects which have an artificially truncated lifespan of 15 to 20 years. Let the people who are starting these projects be given them for only 15 to 20 years, not more. The oil and gas can be extended to 40 years, but don't do that. Truncate means to cut, so as to align them. So what is the purpose of doing this? To align them with the goal of dramatically cutting emissions by 2050. if your goal of clean energy transition has to, if you have to achieve that goal of clean energy by 2050, then you can have a fossil fuel project, because right now we all going through an energy crisis. But instead of having an oil and gas field for 40-50 years, have natural clean, relatively cleaner fuels for 15, artificially truncated, where you give the project for only 15 to 20 years, not more than that. Then probably you can align it with the goal of transition, cutting emissions by 2050. In particular, Europe and Asia, which must wean themselves off Russian gas and coal respectively, will have too little liquefied natural gas capacity. So in particular, he says Europe and Asia they have too much reliance on Russian. Europe has too much reliance on Russian gas, and Asia has too much reliance on Russian coal. So they must slowly wean off, get away from Russia's gas and oil. They shouldn't depend so much on Russia's gas and oil supply. Instead, they should start their own. One is they have too little liquefied natural gas capacity. So one reason for this is they have too little liquefied natural gas capacity. The trick is to get businesses to back schemes designed to be short-lived. So how will they do that? Well, have businesses which will back schemes, get funding for these schemes which will be short-lived, not long-term plans. One option is for governments and energy grids to offer guaranteed contracts over this period to provide an adequate return on the understanding that capacity will shut down early. So you can give people, owners of oil, natural gas fields, should get an adequate return. That is true. So government should work with them so that they get an annual return, they get an adequate return, but their contract should be guaranteed over a shorter period of time, and they should be told that it should be closed down by this point. One option is for governments and energy grids to give component. Another is to pledge eventual state support. Another is to say, okay, we will give state support to make these projects cleaner. We will help you make these projects not dirty. They will be cleaner, environmentally friendly. For example, through carbon capture and storage. This does not mean easing on the drive towards renewable, the most successful part to date of the world's generally poor response to the climate crisis. So he said, if you do this, you should also have state support for making the energy clean through, he has mentioned methods, carbon capture and storage. Then you are not relaxing on your drive to transition to clean energy. Governments must improve the reach capacity and storage capacities of their grids, remove obstacles that make it harder to add renewable capacity than it should be. So the government on its part must improve reach capacity and storage capabilities of their grids and remove any problems that are there in storing or producing renewable energy. The design of power grids and markets is squarely a matter for government, and they are too often trapped in 20th century thinking. This is a matter for the government. No private player can do it. But unfortunately, governments are not forward thinking. They are still trapped in 20th century. So they're not thinking forward. Can we have a design? Can we have a grid where we store renewable energy? How can we do it? He says that's something the government should do. Unfortunately, governments are not. They're still living in the past as far as thinking is concerned. 21st century, and then okay, the governments are trapped in 20th century thinking. What does the author advocate? 21st century thinking. 21st century thinking turns on new ways to provide smart, resilient grids with zero carbon firm power that makes dependence on renewable, safe and energy. 21st century thinking is what does this? It gives you smart, resilient and reliable renewable power supply. Hydrogen and nuclear power may be crucial here. Politicians need to tell voters that their desire for an energy transition that eschews both fossil fuels and nuclear power is a dangerous illusion. What does the last line mean? Voters should be told that, look, we can't avoid fossil fuels. We can't avoid both fossil fuels and nuclear power in our aim for a energy transition to a cleaner energy. Nuclear power will play a part in it. Alright, so that was a longish passage, lot of important points. We'll refer to the passage where required. But summary is, right now the energy crisis is forcing governments to fall back on fossil fuels, but in doing so they should not think short term, they should think long term, and what is good for the energy transition. And that means giving short term projects for these fossil fuel plants, giving support to them to have carbon capture methods and some other technical terms he has used, so that the energy is relatively clean. And also he says think of nuclear options. Clear? That's the summary of this passage. Now let's look at the questions. The primary purpose of the author is, so primary purpose, we don't have to refer back to the passage. Why has the author written this passage? To suggest that governments resolve the energy crisis by utilizing and ramping up the supply of fossil fuels. He has mentioned it, but with conditions. So this is not the primary purpose. He has mentioned that governments can go back to fossil fuels provided he has put in certain conditions. So this per se is not the primary purpose. To advocate means to support that governments follow a path that allows both safe supplies of energy and climate security. Perfect. This is what he said in the first paragraph. Then he talked of the crisis. Then he talked of what countries are doing. And finally, he gave his suggestions on how to follow this path, where you have a safe energy, secure energy supply, as well as climate security. So B is my correct answer.